This video is a complete chronological timeline of the Quake series, how these games and comics interact with each other, and with it will contain spoilers for everything in this series as of 2025. It was in the void outside of the mortal dimension that the Old Ones dwelled. These outer gods existed well before the first planets, solar systems and galaxies. They were ancient, and when the first mortals came to be, the Old Ones saw playthings to meddle with, to attain worship, and to raise champions for war. Of these Old Ones was Volker, the devourer of flesh and soul. Katala, the ruler of all seas whose knowledge stretched back almost to the dawn of time. Ithagnal, who sought to break the minds of those who discovered her realm of complex, shadowy labyrinths. And then there was Shub Nagrath, the font of unending life and corruption. An entity who went by many names, the Black Goat of the Woods with 1,000 young, the Mother of Abominations, and the Witch Goddess. These were just 4 of the Old Ones, and each was just as devastating as the last. Over the ages, as civilizations rose, fragments, runes, and echoes of the Old Ones breached the mortal realm. Just the glimpse of one of these was enough to drive a mind into madness. For those unfortunate few, they became something more. When an unnamed mortal, let us call him Eldrick, gazed upon an artifact of the fiery Old One Chthon, his mind descended into madness. As his connection strengthened with the entity, he merged with it and became a dreamer within the Dreamlands. In this state, Eldrick's nightmares formed very real and horrific locations within Chthon's home, the dimension of the doomed. As for the dreamer, Eldrick transformed physically into an echo of Chthon, an imitation that existed only within the Dreamlands, something that would become known as a Vadrigar. As more mortals encountered the Old Ones, more Vadrigar were born in the image of the ancient beings they had witnessed, and the Dreamlands expanded as a shared subconscious realm shaped by the nightmares of these dreamers. The Dreamlands was a place of horror and violence, where the darkest and most terrible creatures imaginable were either born or drawn from their own worlds through discovered passageways between dimensions. Shamblers summoned devastating beams of energy, ogres violently swung chainsaws at their targets, and Strogg spat poison. This was a horrific place that existed outside time and space, without death or relief. Each domain of this realm was ruled by its own Vadrigar. There was one domain, however, that was ruled by several. The Arena Eternal was a place created by a collective called the Arena Masters. They craved entertainment through violence, and for this, sought the greatest warriors that ever would and had existed. They crafted arenas of combat and searched the timeline for champions to fight in this place, no matter where or when they were from. Death was not permanent in the Dreamlands, and it would offer the Arena Masters endless entertainment. In the mortal realm, on the distant planet of Stroggos, a race now known as the Strogg thrived on a world rich in metals, minerals, and life. Over the next few centuries, however, it became a landscape of industrial horror ruled by a collective of flesh and metal that sought only to dominate and massacre. How this came to pass remains unclear, but there are theories. The first theory holds that the ancient Strogg encountered an Old One. This meeting did not drive them to madness, but instead granted them strength and forbidden knowledge. Centuries later, this theory gained credibility when explorers uncovered a vast machine buried deep within Strogg space. The device, a singularity capable of collapsing the fabric of reality, concealed within was a region they called the Temple of the Creator. Inside, explorers found carvings depicting a humanoid species, believed to be the Strogg, kneeling before a figure that resembled the Witch Goddess. From her, they rose with one goal: to wage war and assimilate the civilizations they encountered into their army. The second theory is that as the early Strogg grew, they became a little too dependent on technology until their world and bodies could not function without it. In order to survive, they lost their morality and had to harvest the flesh and technology of other races. The final theory is that the Strogg entered a world war following the rise of a dictator. In order to defeat their enemies, this dictator enforced both technological and biological enhancements in the form of super soldiers crafted for war. When the war finally came to an end, however, all that remained with these soldiers: a new blueprint for the Strogg, soulless fusions of flesh and metal. Perhaps the rise and fall of the Strogg was a combination of all of these. Whatever their true origin, the Strogg pursued two main goals: conquest and forced evolution. Their planet was subsequently mined and harvested for resources until it was stripped bare, and this barren landscape soon filled with factories and refineries, as deep underground pipes carried resources across the globe. Metals were smelted into weapons, vehicles were constructed for transport, and development of machines of mass destruction began. As for the native wildlife beyond the industrial wastelands, those who were not captured for Strogg scientists or exterminated, only the strongest endured. They adapted and evolved to survive in the planet's toxic atmosphere. The long-clawed Gex massacred anything brave enough to enter their swamps. Mutants explored the mines for food, and even the ocean life devoured every creature that strayed into their fatal waters. Like any civilization, the Strogg had a ruler and military hierarchy. Each sector of the planet was governed by a warlord who all answered to their supreme leader, the Makron. Interestingly enough, the Makron was chosen from the pool of warlords. From his place in the capital city of Cerberon, he ensured every Strogg unit fulfilled their role as a cog in the war machine. But what were these units? Strogg science had offered the race the ability to forcefully, barbarically evolve themselves to new heights, living weapons designed for specific purposes. The Icarus unit had jetpacks grafted onto their flesh to be the perfect airborne unit. Berserkers were encased in strong armor and trained in the use of hammers and blades, and Enforcers not only had their insides upgraded with Strogg tech, but their right hand was also replaced with a chain gun. Strogg science did not care about the pain of their warriors, only that their army was stronger. The centuries had transformed a once bountiful world into the global base of a war machine, each cog a vital piece that would one day carry them off their world and into the stars. The Strogg's rise into space marked a new, horrifying phase. They scanned the systems for inhabited worlds, conquered them with their vast armies, and began their harvest. The Strogg, however, were not the only race who waged war among the stars. The Greiss Dominion were very similar to the Strogg in the aspect that they too dominated the world they encountered, but for them, it was about the art of conquest, strength, and the improvement of their war machine. This race of warriors punished failure with either exile or death, depending on the circumstances, all commanded from a war council on their capital ship, the Greiss Patawaran. Back on the Strogg warpath, their successful conflicts offered them the opportunity to expand and thrive. Just like they had done in their own world, they extracted and stripped these occupied worlds of their natural resources. This influx of minerals and metals allowed them to forge new outposts, freighters, factories, weapons, armor, vehicles, and facilities. As for the biological life they encountered, it was treated as a resource as well. Anything new was taken to Strogg scientists, who examined and evaluated whether these life forms or any part of their biology would be useful to the Empire. Beating hearts were extracted and repurposed as biological pumps that drove materials through Stroggos' network of pipes. Torsos were installed into energy ports and used to power machinery, and the scientists even tortured their captives just to see how they reacted to pain and how much they could handle before they perished. Through the injection of nanite colonies, the bodies of these captives were kept in a state of constant self-repair and torment. Through knowledge, the Strogg continued to grow. They salvaged technology and research from the civilizations they conquered, and enhanced the units and type of soldiers in their army with what they had captured through a process called Stroggification. Within large assembly line styled medical facilities, those deemed worthy of Stroggification were transformed into the best versions of themselves through the lens of Strogg science. A colossal spider-like creature had armor fused directly to its body, then was armed with blasters and homing rockets. Designated a harvester, it became one of the deadliest additions to the Strogg army. The Berserker was once a part of another humanoid race, rebuilt with a metal spike for an arm and a mace hand on the other, its body painfully augmented to channel lightning. Strogg scientists themselves removed their own legs in favor of hovercraft bases to navigate their labs more easily, alongside other alterations to their bodies. To control each unit, a neurocyte chip was implanted into their brains. This implant overrode their minds, carried the Strogg language and technological knowledge, and granted access to Strogg systems. It stripped away all free will and forced absolute obedience. They became living weapons of war. To control all of these units and coordinate these actions, the Makron relied on the Nexus. This resembled the giant brain of a massive creature that had been transformed into a living processor. Through relay sensors called tetranodes scattered across their domain, this processor essentially kept the Strogg running. The Nexus was the brain of the Strogg Empire, the tetranodes its nervous system, and the Strogg unit its limbs and weapons, all bound together within a multi-planetary hive mind. Each new race discovered offered the Strogg something new to experiment with, but those deemed of little value or biological matter damaged during the harvest met a different fate. They were broken down into a renewable biofuel called Stroyant. This slimy substance of pure protein and nutrients was created to heal injured Strogg units and also served as their food supply. Through the Stroggification process, every unit was adapted to rely on this substance. Over time, under the rule of the Makron, the Strogg expanded their reach, learned to manipulate black holes, and used that discovery to develop Slipgate technology. The only limitation was that every entrance required an exit, so as they pushed further into the galaxy, they established a vast network of slipgates to allow instant travel between distant points. With each war, this soulless fusion of decaying flesh and metal expanded its knowledge and reach across the systems. Far away from the Strogg War, in the Drift system, the peaceful race of the Melem flourished. During their rise as a civilization, they uncovered a mysterious orb of plasma radiating immense power. They called it the Fathom Orb. For some time, Melem scientists studied this artifact and learned to harness its energy to power their civilization. As a theocratic people, the Melem Church ruled over the governments and their armies, and they declared the orb a holy blessing. From it also came the Ghost Walkers, agents imbued with traces of the Fathom Orb that granted them the ability to momentarily phase shift into another dimension to evade harm. What the Ghost Walkers realized, however, through their interaction with the orb was that it was not just a ball of energy, it was a gateway to another realm. Every time an agent ghost walked, the seal between realms cracked just a tiny bit more, and the entities inside saw a little bit more of the Melem world. They whispered into unwary minds, promising power, salvation, anything at all if someone would only break the barrier that held them. To protect the Melem, the church built a shrine around the orb in the region of Anital. Along its walls, they carved the story of the first ghost walkers, shown holding back the writhing tendrils spilling from the orb, a warning to any who managed to slip past the shrine's defenses. The Fathom Orb was the holiest artifact of the Melem Church, and to keep their authority over the population, the church priors hid the darker truth of its nature. They continued to use the orb to power their civilization, and they brought Ghost Squad initiates to the shrine to be imbued with a trace of its energy, blindfolded, so they would never learn what the church had discovered within it. Across the vast expanse of the universe, countless civilizations rose and fell, each touched by war in their own time. The Greiss, the Strogg, the Erd, humanity, all of them parts of a larger design, and every story carried its own weight. Over in the Milky Way galaxy in the Sol system, planet Earth had its own interaction with an old one. Sometime in the early 20th century, in what appeared to be rural New England, Pastor Paul Phillips found an ancient piece of paper hidden in the seam of a cabinet in his office. When he pulled it out and gazed at it, he felt an instant sense of dread. The paper held a profane diagram covered in eldritch runes, its center marked by a sheep's eye. Certain he was looking at something otherworldly and unholy, he threw it into the fire. Over the following days, the pastor suffered dark, twisted nightmares and waking visions. Unknown to him, he had gazed upon an artifact of an old one, Volker, and his fate was sealed. Paul had always wanted to bring his flock together, to help them, but the growing connection to Volker twisted his mind and ambitions. Shortly after, he poured prussic acid into cups for his flock, and himself. When his soul left the mortal realm alongside his parishioners, Pastor Paul Phillips entered the Dreamlands and took shape as a dreamer, becoming a Vadrigar formed in the echo of Volker. Lacking a realm of his own in this place, this imitation of Volker moved into the realm of black magic and began a war against the Lurching King. During their battle, the Lurching King lost his crown, the source of his power. Stripped of it, he fled to the edge of the realm where chaos touched its borders, and there he stumbled upon the rift and made himself its ruler. Volker then claimed the abandoned throne and began his reign over what had once been the Lurching King's domain, becoming the new ruler of the realm of black magic. Those who attend had worshipped the Old One Volker for 12,000 harvests on their distant Dreamlands world, and at just 4 years of age, Galena was offered by her parents as the next sacrifice. This ancient order believed that through their worship of Volker, their lives would be protected and prolonged. Instead, it only brought them ruin. Even as a child, Galena was formidable. Her eyes and voice inspired fear around those around her. As the chosen sacrifice, the child began the path of pain that took her across realms. She faced He Who Walks in Blood, was banished to the hissing realms without runes to protect herself, navigated the swamps of the Neverborn, battled with the Molten One, and confronted the Shriek Tutors. Years passed in torment and isolation as she crossed realm after realm. The girl who returned was not the same as the one who had left. She had become a being of dark power, reborn in Volker's image. She had shred her mortal connections and humanity, and through this, eventually, became Volker's unholy paladin, a chosen champion. Meanwhile, on an Earth-like world within a Dreamland realm, in the Celtic Isles, there stood a settlement called Dufflin. One evening, as the warband celebrated another victory and raised their cups to those who had ascended to Valhalla, everything changed. A madman murdered their chieftain, and the warrior who struck him down was chosen as their new leader. Under his command, the chieftain led many raids, and one of which carried his warband to a distant island. What they unearthed as they plundered would haunt him forever. When he returned home, he was no longer the man his people had known. Whispers spoke of visions that plagued his sleep, of mutterings about dark realms beyond sight. That night, he entered the hut he shared with his pregnant wife. Neighbors heard the shouts, then her screams, then silence. When the door finally opened, the chieftain stepped into the cold air and sheathed his blades. With his eyes pale and distant, he walked through the village and spoke softly to himself in an eldritch tongue. With his band of warriors, the chieftain journeyed west, driven by a compulsion he could not name. His raids fell upon those who worshipped the Celtic gods Lu, Ogma, and Maragu. Yet as their campaign continued, the lands grew stranger, as though they had crossed some boundary. Villages faded into wilderness, and the people they met spoke of gods with names no human tongue could pronounce. In one village, he massacred those who had invoked a ritual to the unholy paladin Galena. Only 2 were offered mercy, a child and a priestess. The priestess told the chieftain that what he felt since the assault on that island was the influence of 2 dark entities, the witch goddess and one of her children, the loam-clad god. Following her instructions, he traveled to the Whispering Tor and discovered the gnarled tongue tree as his mind continued to deteriorate. It told him that its fruits were poisonous and would destroy his flesh, but if he ate it, he would display his undying allegiance to the witch goddess. When he ate this fruit, it grew inside of him, warped him, and transformed him into the Death Knight. He became the champion of Shub Nugrath and left the mortal world. For a dozen centuries, he thrived on the war and opportunity she had given him. When the Vietnam War came to an end in 1975, a Marine returned home to his wife Annie. Together they had 2 children, first a daughter and then a son. It seemed as though he had built a quiet, ordinary life, but this man, known now only as Ranger, would soon face a war far beyond anything he had known, one that would shape the fate of his world. As the world moved into the late 1980s, in the year 1988, a teenage girl known by the nickname Slash was committed to the Good Samaritan psych ward by her guardian, her grandmother. The commitment followed an incident in which she had been struck by a car. Slash wasn't harmed, but the explanation she gave for why she had wandered so far from home deeply unsettled Officer Dina Hardwick. Slash struggled with schizophrenic episodes, and she told the officer that she had simply been following the music. She showed no fear and seemed unbothered by her minor injuries. Instead, she was irritated that the car had interrupted her. The song she claimed to be chasing was Swan Lake, a melody she had grown up hearing from a music box owned by her grandmother. She adored it, could not sleep without it, and dreamt of becoming a skater like the figure that spun inside the box. Over time, however, she began to see dark, spidery shapes crawling at the edges of her vision. In and out of psychiatric facilities, Slash relied on clozapine to steady her mood, but when it failed to quiet the spiders, she turned to heroin instead. The visions grew stronger, and they drew her towards something darker and more distorted within herself. These apparitions may have been early manifestations of the Spider Old One, Ithagnol, brushing against her mind. Dr. Wendell Gilman had always believed humanity was like flies trapped in a glass jar of their own making. They collided with invisible walls that their sight, touch, smell, taste, and hearing could not recognize. A cage that forced them to walk in circles. Yet beyond those unseen barriers, he believed something great awaited. He hoped that through his work, he could break the jar, step beyond it, and become something more. Throughout history, he had read accounts of entities beyond the mortal world, of people who had vanished without explanation, and of sudden acts of madness. He believed these stories and the artifacts tied to them were all connected. It was only when he was offered the opportunity to work at the top secret Cornudas Transport Research Complex that he was able to explore these darker fascinations further. The 1990s brought both conflict and rapid progress to humanity, and the remote research facility, nearly 90 minutes from the nearest town, would prove to be far more significant than it first appeared. Funded through the government, the facility stretched for miles underground, each level devoted to its own branch of scientific advancement. On Gilman's floor, he was tasked with designing and developing Slipgate technology in the Slipgate complex. The Cornudas Transport Research Complex was run with strict precision. Marines and guard dogs patrolled the corridors, commanders oversaw teams, and on-site counselors were hired to help personnel cope with anything they had witnessed. Yet, because their work was classified, none of them were permitted to actually speak about it. Wendell held no allegiance to any government, and he felt no pull of empathy. He cared only about proving his theories of something beyond. Within the secrecy of Cornudas, he had access to personnel, technology, and knowledge kept far from the public, and he intended to use it for his own ends. In late March of 1990, the Soviet Union's secret agency, the KGB, launched a new initiative known as Project Mountain King. With the nation showing signs of internal instability, its leadership feared the possibility of a full collapse. To prepare for the worst, the agency authorized a covert program to create a genetically engineered super soldier through cloning, a weapon they could deploy if the crisis deepened. The embryo chosen for the program was created from the genetics of Spetsgruppe A operatives, the most elite soldiers the Soviet Special Forces had to offer, combined with material taken from inmates of the notorious Black Dolphin prison. Once Project Mountain King was forced into rapid acceleration, the specimen, now called Prime, was pushed through an intensified maturation process and fitted with early cybernetic augmentations. Within a single year, by 1991, Prime had matured fully to the size and stature of an adult man. At the same time, the KGB's Leningrad branch had begun its own research into telesthesia, the ability to perceive one's surrounding through senses beyond the ordinary five. This team was quietly assisted by Dr. Wendell Gilman, who shared his knowledge of otherworldly realms and strange artifacts. With his guidance, they achieved early breakthroughs in telesthesia, but the field proved unstable and refused to follow any natural laws they understood. When 3 researchers suffered mental collapse and were institutionalized, the project was shut down. Meanwhile, Prime was subjected to Spetsnaz combat training. He performed exactly as he had been designed to, but the team soon uncovered that the remnants of the telesthesia work, combined with the cybernetics grafted to his body, triggered sudden and lethal outbursts. These episodes struck without pattern, his temperament shifting in an instant, and the tissue surrounding his implants began to die as the foreign systems overloaded his biology. During one such episode, 7 of his handlers and 4 guard dogs suffered the full force of his rage. To address this problem, Project Mountain King decided to clone Prime, hoping that through several iterations they could remove these defects. In May of 1992, Project Mountain King learned that an American scientist had assisted the Leningrad branch before the disaster, and they now saw him as someone of potential value. When Iteration 9 of the Prime clones were born with a congenial sight impairment, they contacted Gilman for help. In a secret communication, the American scientist assured them that he could engineer full telesthesia in at least one subject, but he had 3 demands. He wanted all 20 clones of this iteration to be delivered to him for experimentation, no oversight, and most importantly, access to certain antiquities held in the Hermitage Vaults, a restricted storage facility beneath the State Hermitage Museum. Project Mountain King had no idea how the scientist even knew the vaults existed, but after the dissolution of the Supreme Soviet the year before, funding for the program had collapsed. They had no choice but to accept. As for what was inside the vaults, well, over the centuries, the Old Ones had touched the mortal world many times, leaving runes and artifacts from their breaches. An author named H.P. Lovecraft even drew on some of these encounters in his stories. Across the ages, these remnants were collected and stored, and they offered valuable insights to anyone seeking to look beyond the mortal realm. By early 1993, Dr. Wendell Gilman had already pushed his work on the clones into full motion. His breakthrough came from removing their eyes and branding ancient eldritch runes, likely derived from the Hermitage artifacts, onto their ocular orbits. It was gruesome work, but in Gilman's mind, progress was never to be limited by morality or pain. Clone number 7 was the first to be classed as a success. He displayed the ability to perceive the world around him through telesthesia, but this was not what Gilman actually required from his subjects. He wanted them to see not into this world, but through the glass jar into the realms beyond. When he pushed number 7 to look again, to force the connection across dimensions, even a brief glimpse of another world flooded him with eldritch energy that burned him from the inside out. It was during this period that his work also began to draw the attention of an old one, the witch goddess, and a connection started to take hold. Back in Moscow, the Project Mountain King team grew desperate for updates on Gilman's work, but their constant demands only frustrated him. To keep them satisfied and out of his way, he sent back the corpses of some of the failed experiments. Alongside his work on the remaining 13 clones, Gilman also achieved a major advance in his Slipgate research. What was likely through his access to and utilization of ancient artifacts, Wendell managed to successfully open up a gateway to another realm. The problem was that he could not form a stable connection, but even so, it confirmed that the realms he had theorized truly existed. October the 11th marked the day Project Mountain King began to distrust their American scientist. When the remains of Iteration 9 were returned for examination, the researchers who handled them soon reported sleep disturbances, disembodied whispers, and even acts of self-mutilation. They suspected Gilman of sabotage, but in truth, a mere glimpse of the runes carved into the failed clones was enough to drive them into madness. They worried that all of this time and effort had been for nothing and resigned themselves to the fact that Prime would be their only success despite his aggressive outbursts and continued necrosis. As Gilman juggled his work on the clones for Moscow and his Slipgate research for the American government, one of his portals connected to another Slipgate on a mortal world. When he stepped through, he discovered a world of industrial horror. Massive weapons rose into the sky, data brains darted through the air, and warriors of flesh and steel carried futuristic weapons, some powered by dark matter, others by lightning. The Strogg had developed so much over their time, and aware that this was not a safe place to be, Gilman gathered what he could about their technology, returned to Earth, and sealed the connection. This intrusion was not unseen by the Strogg. They saw it as an act of aggression. While they could not reopen the gateway, they detected exactly where the incursion had originated and dispatched a small fleet with a space slipgate towards the Sol system in preparation for an invasion. The Cornudas Transport Research Complex offered exactly what Dr. Wendell Gilman needed. With limited clones to experiment on, he turned his attention to the Marines stationed throughout the facility. They were durable, disciplined, and available, which made them suitable vessels for the theories he still wished to test. The data he had extracted from the Strogg incursion accelerated his Slipgate studies far beyond what any government official understood. With that knowledge, he refined the gates until they linked to realms he had only glimpsed through unstable breaches. Soon, outposts and installations spread across the strange territories of the Dreamlands, or as Gilman had come to name them, through his connection to the witch goddess, the Quake realms. These realms were dangerous, and Marines were deployed to guard the slipgates and the outposts that surrounded them from the entities that roamed within. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Slash continued to cycle in and out of treatment facilities while the visions that plagued her grew sharper and more hostile. In April, she attacked 2 nurses and insisted she had only been trying to cut the spiders out of them. Across the city, a young man who went by the name Anarki lived in luxury yet found himself obsessed with altering his own body. His fixation eventually brought him to a Russian doctor who had set up a quiet practice after the collapse of the USSR. Later that July, Project Mountain King received a short report from Dr. Gilman. He wrote that 17 of the 20 clones had died, but 3 remained intact. These 3 were considered successes and could see without sight. Number 17, number 18, and 1 more whose designation he chose not to include. When they were delivered to Moscow, the team noticed metal visors fixed to their faces. During training, the clones demonstrated the ability to track multiple targets through layers of concrete, steel, and even carbon fiber. Hoping to understand the paranormal source of this site, the researchers sent one of them for examination, intending to reverse engineer its mask. Instead, they found only blood and carved runes beneath it. The sight of those markings drove the team into madness. On a scheduled transfer to the St. Petersburg facility, number 18 and another clone were loaded into an armored transport vehicle with 4 guards. During the journey, however, number 18 killed the guards and the unnamed clone. In the corpse of that clone, he had a small slip of paper that carried a message written in Russian Braille, a secret message from Gilman. As a consequence of this incident and the disturbing paranormal effects number 18 had on every researcher who interacted with him, Project Mountain King scheduled him for euthanasia to protect their staff. Before the order could be carried out, the clone vanished, plucked from the timeline. He had been drawn into the Dreamlands. There, the Arena Masters saw in him the strength they demanded from the warriors of the Arena Eternal, and they claimed him for their battles. In that place, number 18 took on a new name. He became Gore. The disappearance of number 18, along with the disasters that had unfolded over the previous years, left Project Mountain King with only 2 super soldiers. Prime, the original creation, and number 17, the final surviving Visor clone. The atmosphere deep underground in the winding metal corridors of the Cornudas Transport Research Complex had grown heavier with each passing year of Gilman's work. As 1995 arrived, the Marines he experimented on endured brutal procedures that left them warped by blood injections and crude bionics. Nightmares plagued those stationed in the Quake realms. They grew fearful and prone to sudden bursts of rage, and the on-site counselor became increasingly busy even though no one was permitted to tell him of the cosmic horrors they had seen beyond the gates. Gilman believed he would ascend one day and join the old one he had contacted, but until that moment came, he still had work to complete. It was in February that Emma Johansson and her team began their research dive into the abyssal plane. The expedition faced problems early on, yet by the time the crew reached Point Nemo, the most remote location in the Pacific, everything seemed worth the struggle. To her amazement, Johansson watched as their remotely operated vehicle captured something impossible on the seafloor. Thousands of Tribractium fossils stretched across the mud, some meters wide and others spanning entire decimeters. This was impossible because these organisms had never grown to such sizes. From everything known about the Ediacaran period, the earliest era of complex life on Earth, such fossils should have been tiny and locked within ancient sedimentary rock, not resting openly on the seafloor mud. Their presence suggested that something had moved them here or recreated them entirely. If these fossils truly existed here on the present seabed, Emma realized it would overturn everything they believed about early life, but something about them felt wrong. Later as she slept, she dreamt of countless Tribractia alive on the ocean floor, slowly turning like pinwheels of tendrils. Over the following days, Emma lost interest in the hydrothermal vents she had come to study and focused entirely on the fossils. She and her team traced the spiral patterns across the seafloor and moved towards their center. As they advanced, the vents rose higher around them like the spires of a drowned city, and Emma found it harder to separate her dreams of this place from the waking world. Then she saw her, Cathala, the Old One of the Seas. Johansson grew irritable, driven by a rising madness and compulsion to reach the center of the pattern, and as her team slept, she murdered them. Shortly after, Emma Johansson crossed into the center of that spiral pattern, a dimensional gateway to the ancient spire city she had dreamt of, the Elderworld and domain of Cathala. She, just like many others who had glimpsed an Old One, became a dreamer, transformed into a Vadrigar in the image of Cathala, and her nightmares manifested into new regions in the dimension of the Elderworld. 1 month later, in March, Prime and Visor were deployed in the Battle of Grozny. These super soldiers proved immensely effective on the field, but they had to be kept apart, since their aggression extended even towards one another. Back at the Cornudas Transport Research Complex, a new base counselor was hired to calm the growing unease within the installation. He wondered why the head scientist made operational decisions and approved deployments, but he was not there to question it. His job was to manage the rising tension among the staff. His first assignment was Colonel Montel Rice, another recent arrival who had grown prone to sudden bursts of anger after his exposure to the classified work being conducted below the facility. Meanwhile, the Arabica Massif of Abkhazia in Georgia lies the Krubera Voronya Cave, the deepest known cave on Earth at the time and one of the least explored and most dangerous places on the planet. It was here that a team of cavers named Dyer, Petrenko, Lebedev and Corino set out in search of a lost expedition. They descended to a depth of 1,960 meters, moving camp by camp into the lower regions of the cave. As the days passed, the passages grew tighter and twisted into a maze that pushed them onward through narrow, winding tunnels. Their route finally brought them to the water-filled terminal sump known as Devar Kapitana, the last confirmed location of the missing team. By day 8, Lebedev and Corino began their ascent to the surface to restock supplies, leaving Sam and Petrenko alone to monitor and maintain the sensors. On day 10, as they waited, they heard something strange. Music drifted from the terminal sump, the flooded chamber where the missing cavers had last been seen. When they reached the site, they were amazed to find the water that had filled the cave was gone. Without hesitation, Sam Dyer felt a pull towards the newly opened area and requested Petrenko feed her rope so she could descend. As the faint music guided her deeper into the tunnels below, she felt a shift. These passageways were different. They carried a strange atmosphere, almost as if she had stepped into another realm, but this did not stop her. The music continued to guide her forward, and then she saw it, creatures within a faint purple light. When Sam Dyer looked into the light of the Old One, the Web Queen Ithagnol, she ascended and became Vadrigar, an echo of the Old One in the shadowy labyrinthine dimension of the Netherworld. As 1995 came to an end, back at Cornudas in Texas, Base Counselor Flores grew increasingly concerned about the Marines and whatever they were facing below the surface. Many who came to him were terrified and volatile, and although he knew of the Slipgate complex, he had no idea where the portals led or what purpose they served. Shifts had grown longer, and Dr. Gilman rarely left his office, choosing to communicate with others only through email. Flores wished he could witness what lay below for the sake of the people he was meant to help. Out there in space, that small Strogg fleet moved slowly towards Earth. Despite her history with psychiatric care, Slash followed her dream and became a skater, not in the traditional sense, but as a member of the Los Angeles branch of the Yakuza. The spiders that once terrified her became familiar companions, and over the years, she learned not only to endure them, but to control them in a sense. In January of 1996, Slash received a tattoo of a spider and, through a quiet streak of sadism, compelled the artist to keep tattooing himself without pause until he was restrained hours later. When she met Anarki at a gun range, Slash felt that she had found her person, and he too felt the same. Both were interested in transhumanism, and they sought the right doctors and engineers to make them something more. Over 17 successful combat operations, Prime and Visor had shown just how valuable they were. When Visor, however, discovered the secret message left for him by Dr. Gilman, the effect was immediate. On the 13th of June, they went AWOL. The message itself? The coordinates of the Slipgate complex in Cornudas. At the facility, Counselor Flores had begun to fear for his own safety. Aggression levels across the staff had risen to a dangerous peak, and during one session, Commander Rice slipped into madness. He whispered that they were the Dark Young, then tore open his shirt to reveal the crude cybernetic alterations Gilman had forced onto him. Gilman's connection to Shub had bled into his subjects, and each of them had tasted the madness of an old one. Once his research was complete, Wendell stepped through one of his slipgates and merged with the Witch Goddess. He rose into the rank of a Vadrigar and left the mortal world behind. Having left that glass jar he believed limited humanity, he sought a new goal: to use the Quake realms to wage war against Earth, to shatter the glass for everyone, and with it, the Slipgate activated all over. The Slipgate complex soon collapsed into anarchy as the maddened Marines turned on one another. Commander Rice watched the chaos unfold around him and found himself thinking about everyone who was absent from this moment, a moment he believed would redefine human history. Rice himself had connected to the Old One Goroth, and as a faithful servant, thought it would be best to bring in at least one more sacrifice before he ascended. When the Marine known as Ranger answered the call at 4 in the morning from his commander, he prepared himself straight away. Commander Rice informed him that an emergency briefing was underway. He was their best man to take point in Operation Counter-Strike. An enemy codenamed Quake was using the slipgates of the complex to summon death squads from another dimension, and they needed him. When he hung up the call, the veteran said goodbye to his wife and children and began the 90-minute drive to the Slipgate complex. As for Commander Montal Rice, satisfied that there was another sacrifice on the way, he entered the Slipgate and merged with Goroth, another Vadrigar in the Dreamlands, an imitation of the stony, fused, fiery god. By the time Ranger arrived at the Slipgate complex, he found hostile Marines bleeding from their eyes and a fallen facility. Commander Rice was nowhere to be seen, and it appeared to be solely up to him to stop the Quake invasion he had been told about. Whatever Quake was, it operated from within the Slipgates, so Ranger armed himself with a shotgun and jumped in. When Ranger looked around at his surroundings, he knew he was not on Earth anymore. The sky glowed purple, and the castle he found himself in looked ancient. He had arrived in the dimension of the doomed, the domain of Chthon, a medieval realm of castles, grottos, and keeps. As Ranger fought his way through the Castle of the Damned, he defended himself against the inhabitants of this realm. Cybernetically enhanced human soldiers, grunts, bloodthirsty knights, chainsaw-wielding ogres, and sharp-clawed fiends. Everything in this place wanted to kill him, but his orders were clear. He had to find Quake and stop it. Each Slipgate the veteran located took him to a new place in this dimension. From the Necropolis to the Grisly Grotto to the Gloom Keep, he not only experienced completely different regions, but the creatures that called this place home. The deadliest by far was the Shambler, an electricity-wielding monstrosity without eyes. Ranger carefully navigated the traps within the door to Chthon and reached the lair of the Dimension's ruler, the House of Chthon. This Vadrigar rested comfortably in the pool of lava surrounding it and hurled balls of molten rock at the intruder, but the chamber also held its weakness. Ranger spotted it quickly as he dodged the strikes of the beast. When the human activated 2 pressure plates and then a trigger plate, an electrical charge blasted through the beast. As the creature sank into the lava below, Ranger noticed something odd. A floating rune, the rune of Earth magic. When Ranger reached out and grabbed it, his mind was flooded with information. It showed him that there were 4 runes in total, each one held in a haunted land of Quake. With all 4, maybe he could track down the enemy and save his world. With more runes to uncover, Ranger stepped through into another Slipgate and left the dimension behind, emerging within the realm of black magic. As for Chthon, this was the Dreamlands, and nothing here remained dead for long. It abandoned the dimension of the doomed and drifted in search of a new realm to claim. In the power vacuum it left behind, the powerful Goroth rose and claimed the dimension as his own. Time flowed differently within the Dreamlands. It did not abide by the same rules as the mortal realm, and as Ranger battled his way through the realm of black magic towards his second rune, Visor arrived at the Cornudas Transport Research Complex. When he managed to break inside, he discovered a pre-recorded message left for him by Gilman. The clone was told that the scientist had ascended and that there was a Slipgate nearby that would take him beyond, to be free from the restraints of this realm and mortality. As Visor stepped through and materialized in the Dreamlands, he saw Dr. Wendell Gilman's new form, a terrifying echo of Shub, the witch goddess, the black goat of the woods with 1,000 dark young. These lands had a lot to offer a super soldier bred for purpose, and the Arena Eternal became his home. Meanwhile, Ranger faced new entities that tried to kill him as he pushed towards the dismal oubliettes. Enforcers, Death Knights, and Rotfish were all lethal in close quarters, yet the weapons he gathered gave him every advantage. With an axe, a double-barreled shotgun, nail guns, a grenade launcher, a rocket launcher, and the Thunderbolt, he cut through anything that blocked his path. The slaughter of 2 Vor earned Ranger the Rune of Black Magic, the same relic Volker had wielded ages earlier when he cast out the Lurching King. Through it, Ranger learned that Shub intended to send her minions to Earth to claim it for her. The next Slipgate carried him into the Netherworld, where he carved through Ithagnal's minions as he moved across her domains. The Rune of Hell Magic revealed the terrible truths behind the Witch Goddess and the devastation she would unleash upon Earth. if he failed. The Elder World, domain of Gathala, held the fourth and final rune. Ranger fought his way through Scrags, Enforcers, Zombies, and worse as he pushed through the sewage system, the God Shrine, the Pain Maze, and Azure Agony. When he secured the Rune of Elder Magic, its power joined with the runes of Earth Magic, Black Magic, and Hell Magic, opening a foul region that lay between every realm he had crossed, the Pit of the Witch Goddess. As he looked down, the veteran wondered if someone or something had wanted him to find the runes. He questioned whether he had been placed on this path or if it had all been chance. Within, Ranger finally looked upon the creature behind all of this, Shub Nagrath. With the last of his strength, the veteran avoided the spikes, spheres, and creatures summoned into this pit by their master. The Shamblers and Vors blasted projectiles, but Ranger avoided them. The issue was that none of his man-made weapons had the capacity to penetrate the cosmic entity's skin. To his luck, Ranger discovered a Dire Orb and used it to teleport directly inside of the beast. Moments later, he tore his way out from within its corpse. The death of Quake granted Ranger a rare moment of calm, and with his task complete, he wanted only to return home to his family. This veteran had been called to the Cornudas research complex as a sacrifice, but he had emerged a hero. The vast cavern of lava simmered in the silence that followed the death of the witch goddess. However, looking back, many believe this not to have been her, but one of her dark young. Regardless, Ranger moved through it in search of a slipgate that could take him home. Meanwhile in the rift, Armagon took over control of the invasion of Earth. Armagon was a horrifying combination of ogre and machine. As Shub's second in command, he knew exactly what to do next. The rift was the domain of the Lurching King. It was a place of chaos, and if ripped open in a targeted strike, Armagon believed it could consume the whole of Earth. The eventual discovery of a slipgate brought Ranger back to Earth, into Command HQ, but as he looked around, the military installation was a little too quiet. There were no soldiers and the weapons had been sealed away. On his search, he identified a message left behind by the base commander that Quake's forces had infiltrated the weapons storage facility and their reinforcements had been sent through a slipgate in the research complex. To stop these forces from moving onto Earth, the base had been put into a complete lockdown. It was clear to the veteran that Quake's forces had been taken over by another entity. So he picked up his weapon and gibbed every rotfish, rottweiler, grunt, zombie, enforcer, scrag and shambler that crossed his path. He also encountered something oddly fascinating, a centroid, an armor-plated scorpion that wielded dual nail guns. When he eventually reached the research facility, Ranger looked upon the giant teleporter that Quake's forces had used to overload Earth's slipgates. He knew that as long as this portal existed, his world would never be safe from the realms. He knew that the energy source of this had to be inside, so he re-entered the dark domain. Through the Dominion of Darkness, the Marine pushed forward. He cut down monstrosities on his way through the ancient realms, the Black Cathedral, the Catacombs, the Crypt, and eventually he reached Mortem's Keep. Inside, he located the generator and, without hesitation, destroyed it. In an instant, a wave of nausea swept over him as he was cast out into a liquid void. Time lost all meaning. After what felt like an eternity, a hellish howl filled his mind and blotted out his consciousness. When he awoke, he found himself on the shores of reality with a single clear understanding of the one leading the invasion, Armagon. Quake's slipgate connection to Earth had collapsed, yet Ranger understood that his world and his family would not be safe until Armagon was destroyed. He fought his way through Ter Torment, Pandemonium, Limbo, and the Gauntlet before reaching Armagon's lair. It was the creature's domain and the site of the dimensional rift it intended to tear open in order to consume Earth across time and space. In a challenging battle, Ranger ducked, dived, and used the pillars around him for protection against Armagon's laser cannons and rocket launchers. But even this creature was not strong enough to stop the human who just wanted to get home safe to his family. When Armagon fell, the rift closed and the magic that connected Armagon's power of this realm dissipated. As a result, his fortress began to collapse. With just seconds to spare, Ranger dashed towards a slipgate, thought of his family, and jumped inside. When Ranger opened his eyes, everything appeared to be normal. He was safe and back at Command HQ, but something felt wrong. History had been altered during his absence and had been overrun by a Quake cult. Another Quake entity had stepped into the power vacuum and begun to shape a dark plan of its own. Through the manipulation of time, it aimed to weaken humanity by preventing the critical events that had strengthened them. As the Marine roamed Command HQ, he discovered ancient bindings and a ritual prayer devoted to their leader, Quake. For the sake of the very existence of his family, Ranger re-entered the Quake realms to restore the timeline. Nothing seemed right when Ranger looked around at his surroundings. Hell's Fortress was another dimension with its own set of realms, but this one was different. The entities were darker and more aggressive. The multi-grenade ogre offered a challenge through Deviant's domain. Phantom swordsmen attempted to hack and slash the Marine through the Dread portal. Electric eels promised an awful death if Ranger lost his balance and fell into the water in Judgment Call, and the self-duplicating Hellspawn leapt at him through the well-named Cave of Death. By the time he reached the Temple of Pain, Ranger encountered the minions of the leader of this invasion attempt. The Wraths were deadly, but they led him towards the tomb of the Overlord. The Overlord was a priest who was dedicated to chaos. His time machine had altered Earth's history, but even his protective wrath and skill with his axe, mace, and wrath projectiles were not enough to defeat the human warrior of the Quake realms. This ancient guardian had manipulated time, and with its dead, Ranger set to restore those moments that had been corrupted. As the Slipgate fog whirled around the machine, he was pulled across time to put things right. The changes to time had left anchors in reality that he could reach through Slipgate, and each one was protected by a guardian, a former warrior of Earth who had tried to stop the Overlord but had been twisted into service under its control. Through the corridors of time, Ranger destroyed a guardian in ancient Greece, overcame elemental trials, faced mummies and another guardian in ancient Egypt. He battled the Overlord again in the Dark Ages, and in a Mesoamerican jungle temple, he destroyed the third and final guardian, a high priest. The veteran carefully pressed through the deadly puzzles and traps of the last Bastion stronghold until, at last, he reached the source of evil, where the temporal energy converter had been used to make all of these changes across time. Before him stood one final guardian that defended the inner sanctum, a mighty dragon. This veteran had been through so much at this point. He had waged war against a cosmic god and its horrific minions. With just another obstacle in his path, he utilized every weapon and skill in his arsenal to avoid its fire and lightning breath, dodged its claws, and shot it down. With access to the inner sanctum, Ranger opened fire on the temporal energy converter. As it sank into the molten lava and the veteran rushed towards a charged time pod, reality began to shift back to its predestined path. Ranger had won. Ranger had fought relentlessly to return to his family and keep them safe. He had halted the armies of Quake through the destruction of Shub, defeated her commander Armagon, and restored the timeline after the Overlord and his cult had twisted it. Even after all of this, Ranger did not find himself back on Earth. He was forced once again to fight through the Quake realms. This did not seem to be part of any invasion. It felt instead as if he was being tested as a champion of war through his passage across the dimension of the past. When he defeated the rulers of that realm, Shamblers and War, it seemed for a moment that the veteran might return home. The Dreamlands or the gods that ruled them, however, had other plans. Upon the discovery of a large machine, Ranger carved through the realms of the machinists, blacksmiths, stonemasons, cultists, and astrologers. Each realm held a rune, and once combined, they opened a gateway to an old foe. Chthon had lost its command of the Dimension of the Doomed because of Ranger's actions, and it wanted revenge. In a brutal encounter that pushed every aspect of Ranger's combat skill, Chthon hurled molten projectiles at him while summoned creatures swarmed from every side. With no trap available to bring the monster down, Ranger relied on his lightning gun and drove its power into the creature until it sank back into the lava. This human had been through so much, and having been roped into a war that never seemed to end, he hoped that this time he could actually leave and reunite with his family. However, the Vadrigar of the Arena Eternal saw great promise in him as a champion. When Ranger entered his next Slipgate, he found himself there as a combatant that the Vadrigar Arena Masters would never let go. Despite Ranger's long struggle within the Dreamlands and his eventual restoration of the timeline, the flow of time there followed its own rules. While he fought through nightmares and fractured realities, May, June, and July of 1996 unfolded on Earth without interruption. Life continued as if nothing had happened. It was in August that Anarki began to change. His obsession with shedding the limits of flesh grew into a full fixation. Basic neurotech let him regulate his adrenaline and numb his body to pain, but he wanted more. He had always wanted something more. Anarki's human eyes to him were just wet balls of jelly, windows to the soul, but he wondered if they could be windows to somewhere else. Then he learned of the work of Dr. Howell, a researcher whose studies suggested a connection between the pineal gland and forms of perception that reached beyond ordinary senses. If the gland could be integrated into a new kind of interface, Anarki believed he might finally gain the sight he craved. To get what he wanted, Anarki and Slash arranged a trap. They contacted Dr. Howell under the guise of legitimate interest and convinced him to meet with them in Little Tokyo. Only when he arrived, the doctor found the two had brought their own medical expert, Joji, to participate in a planned procedure. Anarki would receive a neural interface grafted into his brain, a device meant to expand his perception beyond ordinary sight. Slash would undergo a more delicate operation, an electrode implanted directly into her pineal gland in an attempt to trigger the extrasensory response Howell had only ever studied on paper. To Slash, however, this was a lot. Altering her mind to that degree unsettled her. Yet, Anarki dismissed her worries. He believed that the world was empty. Only surgery could allow them to escape its limits. Their bond was very strong, and because it meant so much to him, Slash agreed to go through with hers. Under the threat of violence, Dr. Howell agreed to perform both procedures with the assistance of Joji. When he woke up after his surgery, the universe opened up for Anarki. He saw worlds new and terrible, the fumes of bottomless pits as things crawled out of them, engines devouring and destroying, screams constant, and somewhere specific that fascinated him. A collection of arenas of death and terror. The Arena Eternal called to him, and with a connection to that realm, both he and Slash were guided there by the Vadrigar Arena Masters. As Earth settled into a short era of calm, violence unfolded elsewhere in the galaxy. While the small Strogg fleet continued to approach Earth, another system slipped into open conflict. The Greiss had massacred and conquered many civilizations across the system under the command of one of their most prominent warlords, Scalebearer. The worlds of the Erd had collapsed under his might, and what remained of them had been claimed and transformed into cogs in the Greiss war machine. This was another successful conquest, and as they moved into the Dricht system, he thought that maybe it was time to consolidate his conquests and rule rather than expand. To cement his position in the Greiss Empire, there was only one more world left in this system, and from Greiss surveillance, it appeared to be occupied by a peaceful religious race. On that world, the Melem knew a hostile force had entered their system. Though it caused no fear among them, their culture had prepared for war over countless generations. Training halls and academies shaped children into ghost walkers, warriors conditioned for discipline, silence, and lethal precision. From these ranks emerged the most formidable fighters of all, an elite order called Ghost Squad, created to confront any threat that dared approach their home. When the Greiss landed on the Melem world, they expected a simple assault only to be massacred by what they called phantom enemies who could not be hit. Upon the report of failure and the nature of their enemies, Scalebearer turned to anger. He called his warriors weaklings and descended to the world himself to show them how to fight. Despite his confidence, Scalebearer watched as his siege engines were quickly destroyed and the phantom warriors flowed around and through him. It was only then that he realized that this peaceful race was an actual threat, and he retreated. This action did not go unnoticed by the War Council. As a result of his cowardice, Scalebearer was summoned to the Greiss capital ship, the Patawarren. To them, the assault on the world of the Melem had been a complete failure. Scalebearer was asked why he did not stay and die with the rest of his men. His actions had brought shame to them. For this, he was exiled. On the Melem world, without war, the population returned to their normal lives as they restored order on the other worlds in their system. Within the Ghost Squad Academy, new candidates continued to cycle through their trials, and among them was a recent recruit who displayed exceptional skill. Her name was Nyx. This recruit flew through the academy under the tutelage of Captain Rowe, and just like every Ghost Squad recruit, Nyx failed her impossible final test. Nyx was ordered to assassinate her closest friend, Tasia, with a sniper rifle. The young recruit refused to fire and instead turned the rifle on Captain Rowe. The test was never intended to make her kill her friend. The rifle's safety was locked in place so no harm could be done. What Captain Rowe wanted to know was whether she would follow an order that demanded the life of someone she cared about. The point of the exercise was simple. Victory had no worth if a warrior abandoned the people she fought to protect. From there, Nyx was imbued with energy from the Fathom Orb and sent on missions by the Conclave across the system as an agent of Ghost Squad. Years had passed since his exile, but Scalebearer carried a growing obsession. It was not only the memory of his defeat that gnawed at him, he wanted to understand how the Melem had been able to overpower him at all. From his fixation, the exiled warlord began to have visions of a great orb made of plasma and power, and it whispered to him. He knew these were not just visions but messages from something greater. If he could claim the power he had seen, he believed he could restore his reputation. The problem he faced was simple, but the Greiss doctors and scientists who still communicated with him dismissed his visions as delusions. Over time, the visions grew more vivid. He saw the walls of reality collapse around him and felt the voices reach out to him. They whispered that they needed him. his dreams plagued with impossible black cities built on the foundation of broken universes, and then they showed him exactly where the orb was. With nothing else to lose, Scalebearer alone entered his ship and crashed it on the world of the Melem at the Shrine Prefrastructure, slaughtered the Guardians and entered the Shrine. Guided by the voices, he avoided the traps of this place, and in turn, they reached through and disabled the automated security systems. At the center of the shrine, he stood before the Fathom Orb and reached out to it. When he pushed his hand through the plasma, the energy surged into him, and in an instant, he vanished. Outside the temple, the church elders gathered for an emergency council. The orb had been breached, and the conclave worried that without immediate stabilization, its energies would begin to erode the fabric of their reality. To reclaim what had been torn from the orb, Captain Rose summoned her most relentless agent. When Nyx received an urgent call from the conclave, she was confused. The dispatch had used the Greiss prefix, but they had been fought off their world years before. Although she suspected a mistake, she returned to her world anyway. Upon her arrival, Nyx was informed that a Greiss ship had crashed and broken into the Fathom Shrine. The Melem worried that if the Greiss held onto the power they had stolen, the unstable orb would tear their world apart. An issue arose after Nyx's summon. She was eager to enter the shrine and help her people, but the leaders claimed old laws and holy doctrine forbid her entrance. Behind the scenes, these religious leaders sought not to help their people but to hide the secrets that their holy Fathom Shrine was not a gift from the gods, but something evil. Their power over the Melem simply meant more to them. Despite their objections, Nyx broke their rules and entered the shrine. This agent had not seen the shrine in person before. Her only interaction with the orb was blindfolded. Within the temple halls, she discovered the carvings left as a warning that told the truth about the orb and understood why her leaders had forbidden her entrance. The first Ghostwalkers had been wardens of something dark inside the orb, not guardians. As she approached the heart of the shrine, Nyx saw it, the Fathom Orb. It loomed before her, radiating every color at once. A low hum rolled through the chamber, carrying a rhythm that felt like a whisper meant only for her. This was a defensive response from the orb, a mechanism meant to keep intruders from reaching what it held inside. The Greiss warlord was nowhere to be seen. He had already entered the orb, and Nyx understood that if she did not reclaim the energy he had taken and restore the seal, the orb would continue to break down. As Nyx ghost walked into the orb, she felt like her body was shredded. The agent looked around as she passed through a realm of twisted eyes, tendrils, organs, and voices that were not voices at all. Shapes and entities that offered knowledge and power in exchange for her sanity. The lure of the Vadrigar and the Old Ones to become something more, but Nyx ignored them and pushed through the void. When she left the Ghost Walk, the agent found herself somewhere new. An unfamiliar distorted landscape, and before her stood the Greiss, Warlord Scalebearer. He had been guided by the voices inside the orb to this place, and she sought to claim from him the essence he had stolen. Unknown to them both, this was not a place they would be able to leave easily. The Arena Masters of the Arena Eternal saw promise in these warriors. Back in the mortal realm, as the Greiss pushed into new regions of space, they crossed paths with the Strogg, and a conflict between the two war-driven empires began. Back on Earth, during the mid-21st century, the planet fell into turmoil. Weather patterns turned violent, natural disasters struck with greater force, and entire regions collapsed under waves of terrorism and open conflict. To regain control and relieve the burden on individual nations, world leaders created the Global Defense Force, a military organization that operated beyond traditional borders and functioned as a unified military body tasked with protecting the planet itself rather than a single territory. Through the collaborative efforts of every nation involved, humanitarian aid reached those who suffered from natural disasters, and even historically unstable regions found stability. Alongside this, humanity also looked to the stars and established colonies and outposts on other worlds and moons. Kingsland on Earth's moon, Mars, and Olympus were just some of these. Each world was also monitored by orbiting space facilities such as the McCulloch and the Magellan. It seemed humanity had bounced back from the brink of disaster. This truly was a time of expansion and exploration for humanity. But unknown to them, over the past 70 years, the Strogg had slowly travelled towards them, and by around 2065, they reached the outskirts of the Sol system. But the Strogg did not activate their Slipgate straight away. Instead, they observed the worlds occupied by humanity. Earth was selected as their primary target, and the other worlds along the way were considered a bonus for their harvest. Meanwhile, on Earth, Ceti, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence detected an unknown non-terrestrial transmission from just beyond the asteroid belt on the edge of the solar system. Shortly after this, the human colony on Mars stopped responding, and then others fell silent. Earth's government, however, insisted that the loss of contact had nothing to do with the signal Ceti had detected. When they were ready, the Strogg activated their Slipgate and opened a connection directly to Stroggos. From it came a Strogg fleet that had prepared for this very moment. Soon after, countless ships travelled towards Earth. The Strogg hive mind, driven by the Nexus through the Makron, dispatched specialized units across Earth to establish footholds that would secure the highest probability of conquest. Before landing, they had mapped the planet in meticulous detail, infiltrated its communication networks, and studied human behavior well enough to anticipate how the species would respond. As with every campaign, the Strogg pursued two goals. They would seize Earth's population, resources and technology, and any humans deemed unfit for Stroggification would be processed into Stroyant to sustain their war machine. The sudden arrival of the Strogg fleet, followed by the bombardment of humanity's strongest cities with missiles, lasers, and ground units, gave the invaders an advantage through sheer surprise. As Earth's military scrambled to regroup and formulate a plan of defense, they could only watch as Paris, Peking, Reykjavik, Tokyo, and countless other cities fell. Strogg units flooded the streets and seized anything they could as civilians were dragged through Slipgates and taken to Stroggos. In the chaos that followed, the world looked to the Global Defense Force for protection. As the GDF regained its footing, Strogg forces struck targeted regions across Earth, each assault designed to secure the smoothest possible harvest. In Sudan, they converted an oil refinery into a Stroyant production facility. In Algeria, they opened a Slipgate to guarantee a steady stream of reinforcements. In Yosemite Valley, they contaminated the water supply to weaken the population so that they could be taken with minimal resistance. Strogg aggressors advanced as the primary foot soldiers. Constructors supported their push with heavy engineering and battlefield reinforcement. Infiltrators breached security systems. Oppressors directed artillery and orbital fire. Technicians moved across the field and used Stroyant to restore fallen allies. All of them operated under the control of the Strogg hive mind, guided through the Nexus. What the Strogg had not anticipated was the resilience of humanity. Months became years as the war dragged on. The GDF deployed its forces across the globe and struck back at Strogg-held territories. The most critical of these was in Antarctica, where the Strogg had constructed a Nexus tower intended to serve as the primary command and control center for all their forces on Earth. This installation was heavily defended. Across battlefields around the world, the GDF engaged Strogg units and recovered the weapons built into their bodies. Using their armaments, GDF scientists studied their function and reverse-engineered Strogg technology to strengthen humanity's own. With these advancements, the GDF began to level the playing field, using recovered Strogg schematics to blueprint and construct a new generation of human warships and weapons. At a Norwegian GDF research station known as the ARC, scientists analysed Strogg biotechnology. In Nevada, an American team examined a captured Strogg Slipgate to understand how the invaders manipulated space. The recovery of a Strogg data brain intercepted on its way to establish another Strogg outpost offered further insight into their methods. The science teams delivered crucial breakthroughs to the GDF. With the knowledge they gained, field units shut down Slipgate, pushed back invading forces, and reclaimed water sources that had been contaminated. From Africa to Finland to Australia, the GDF stalled, assaulted, and captured every Strogg installation they could reach. The population of Earth had first assumed their world had been targeted for its resources, but the truth became clear only after millions of people were captured. As the GDF discovered and shut down makeshift Strogg processing facilities, they realized that humanity itself was the resource the Strogg had come for. In orbit above Africa, Corporal Matthew Kane served aboard Space Station Armstrong. While it operated as an orbital defense platform, the GDF team stationed there also used it to study and store creatures and weapons that had been developed on Mars. During a Strogg assault on the station, only Kane survived. The years of conflict have been brutal, but the combined strength of Earth's militaries had finally given humanity a fighting chance. As the GDF assessed the state of the war, they recognized that they had the knowledge and resources required to drive the Strogg off-world. To bring the war to an end, the GDF focused on two main missions. The first targeted a volcano in the Bay of Plenty in New Zealand, where they intended to use a geothermal facility to generate an atmospheric EMP capable of disabling the Strogg's fleet in Earth's orbit. The second mission was led by scientists working to infiltrate the Slipgate network so that GDF forces could assault the heavily guarded Nexus tower in Antarctica. The Strogg moved quickly to counter both operations. Even under that pressure, humanity pushed forward and achieved something almost no other civilization had managed. Both operations succeeded. They cut the Strogg off from their Slipgate network and prevented further reinforcements. The activation of the geothermal EMP then disabled the fleet in orbit. With their invasion collapsing, the remaining Strogg withdrew through their space Slipgate back to Stroggos, and once it closed, it stayed sealed. Humanity had won this war, but those years of conflict had come at a cost. The retreat of the Strogg gave humanity a moment to breathe, but no one paused to rest. Their cities lay in ruins and their numbers had fallen dramatically, yet morale remained high. Humanity had survived something that could have ended them entirely. Through their study of Strogg technology and weapons, humanity learned the invaders' combat tactics, language, coding systems, and weapon designs. Their exploration of captured Slipgates even revealed the location of the Strogg homeworld. Together, these discoveries gave humanity everything they needed to understand their invaders. Earth had driven the Strogg from their world, but they knew that this empire would return one day, even if it took another 70 years to reach them. In response, the GDF of Earth united with the colonies and outposts throughout the local systems to form the Terran Coalition of Man. Over on Stroggos, preparations began for another assault on Earth once the Sol system could be reached again, but the conflict with humanity was not the only war the Strogg had been fighting. Their long struggle with the Greiss Dominion had also reached an end. From the Greiss, the Strogg had taken many warriors for transformation. Their Stroggification process, however, came with problems. Most of the neocortex had to be removed, which left these units with little ability to communicate. They tended to stand motionless in odd locations, waiting for an enemy to approach. Because of this, they were used mostly as guards across Stroggos and in Cerberon. Back in the Terran systems, the Coalition of Man offered promise, unification of the human colonies across the systems. The GDF secured Earth, while the Space Marine Corps expanded its ranks and warships through research on captured Strogg vessels, and across the wider system, the Coalition established new divisions dedicated to war, exploration, and expansion. Following months of recovery after the fall of Space Station Armstrong, the lone survivor, Corporal Matthew Kane, was summoned before the United Nations. He was ordered to stay silent about the work done there and how he had survived. Once his rehabilitation was complete, he was reassigned to Rhino Squad, one of the Coalition's elite special operations units. Meanwhile, Lance Corporal Athena Hayes joined the Expeditionary Force, and a Marine known by the callsign Bitterman enlisted with the Coalition for his own reasons. The Strogg had murdered his parent and sister, and he intended to repay that debt if he was ever given the opportunity. So many had worked to unite the Terrans, and the Coalition focused on safeguarding the generations to come. With their new technology, their ability to construct slipgates, their knowledge of the Strogg chain of command and the coordinates of Stroggos itself, they built an army with one goal: to strike the enemy before they could return. In the 3 hours leading up to the planned assault on Stroggos, the Terran Coalition of Man opened the interplanetary gateway between Earth and the Strogg homeworld. Ships and drop pods were fueled, systems brought online, and each unit's objectives were uploaded onto their field computers. Under the authority of Marine Commandant James, 200,000 Marines boarded the capital ships of the Terran Coalition of Man. Their study of captured Strogg data had revealed exactly what waited for them on arrival. The primary mission for the first wave of Operation Alien Overlord carried 4 main objectives. After their drop pods reached the surface, the Marines were to establish an uplink between Command and the Strogg communication network so the Coalition could direct units to their targets. Their second task was to destroy the Big Gun, which would allow the second wave of human forces to land without suffering mass casualties. Third, they were ordered to shut down the interplanetary gateway between Earth and Stroggos to prevent any future assault on their homeworld. The final objective was the most critical: assassinate the Makron, the leader of the Strogg. Coalition strategists believed that, with the Makron dead, the Strogg ranks would collapse without clear control, and the resulting power struggle amongst the warlords would leave the enemy unable to mount a unified defense. The Marines of the first wave boarded one of C-30K Marine carriers, Deimos and Phobos. Once inside, they were secured into their drop pods and waited. The pods had a far better chance of slipping past the fire of the Big Gun, while the carriers remained in orbit until that weapon was destroyed. As a Marine of the 101st Spaceborne, Bitterman prepared as the carrier moved towards the slipgate leading into Strogg space. Among the hundreds of assault pods around him were those carrying Athena Hayes, Joker, Sarge, and Stepchild. When the order came, the pods were launched. Within seconds of the official human invasion of Stroggos, the space around the planet lit up with fire and debris as the big gun powered online and fired bursts of electromagnetic energy at the pods. Bitterman narrowly avoided these strikes, but his pod was knocked off course by another Marine and he was separated from his platoon. As he descended, he heard the panicked cries of Marines who were not as fortunate. Their pod systems disabled or even completely destroyed by the electromagnetic blasts of the big gun. When Bitterman's pod slammed into the surface of Stroggos, another Marine, Sarge, made it down too, but as he began to fight the Strogg on the ground, he vanished without warning. Plucked from this realm to fight in an arena where his combat skill would serve a different purpose. Joker's pod missed its intended landing zone when it struck an asteroid, knocking him off course and cutting him off from his squad. Through his quick thinking, he was able to hotwire his pod to navigate it to safety. When his pod finally hit the surface, he was forced to cross a region filled with Gex, gunners and Strogg guards as he made his way towards the compound where his squad was waiting. But just as he reached the site, he saw his squad cut down by Strogg forces and could do nothing about it. Joker belonged to an elite commando unit assigned to a separate objective from Operation Alien Overlord, and now he had to carry it out alone. His mission was to reach the Strogg base responsible for preparing the next Earth invasion and destroy the fleets being assembled there. In orbit, the Strogg activated a weapon that the TCM had not anticipated, a gravity well. The device trapped anything caught inside it. Dropships and even the capital ship were held in place, unable to maneuver, and Strogg vessels picked them off one by one. In the middle of the chaos, Marine Stepchild chased a Strogg Gorgon fighter and struck it mid-flight. The fighter crashed into the ground and opened a hole leading into a Strogg mine, and Stepchild's pod smashed through it. As for Athena, her pod was hit by the big gun on the way down, and when she struck the ground, the hatch release failed. She was sealed inside with no way out. Fortunately for her, the internal system stayed active and kept her alive and sustained. All she could do was listen to the distant sounds of battle. During this initial launch, 95% of the drop pods had been destroyed or the Marines inside them captured. Only Joker, Stepchild and Bitterman had made it through, while Athena remained sealed inside her pod and was assumed dead. While the battle raged in orbit, a Strogg unit designated Infiltrator 1815 and its robot companion Pika watched the metal shells fall across the landscape. To them, food was dropping from the sky. As the impacts faded, the unit received its orders: recover any surviving humans for Stroggification, and send whatever was left to the processing plant to be turned into Stroyans. Having landed just on the outskirts of Cerberon, Bitterman explored his surroundings with just a pistol and discovered Strogg units he had never seen before: Stroggified Greiss. They were mindless, slow, but violent. Elsewhere, Infiltrator 1815 and Pika received new orders from the Makron. They were to follow the human who had landed, observe him and record his death. The caveat was that they could only watch and not perform the act themselves. As Bitterman moved towards the communication center to complete his first objective, he fought his way through the outer base and into an installation packed with light guards, shotgun guards, enforcers, gunners, amongst many more of the Strogg's gruesome creations. The Marine's arrival at the communication center was met with heavy resistance, but he was ready for it. With his newly acquired shotgun and machine gun, he cut down every unit that tried to block his path and established the much-needed uplink. Within moments, Command received a full view of what was happening on the surface. In space, two major threats remained. The big gun was still active, and the gravity well continued to hold the human forces in place, leaving them exposed to enemy fire. In the Strogg mine Stepchild had crashed into, the Marine checked his pod system and could see that the planet's gravitational pull had increased and his squadmates were in trouble, held in space. As he pushed deeper into this region towards the surface to find a way to help them, the Marine encountered the aggressive Strogg forces and then discovered something interesting: a tectonic stabilizer. Something the Strogg had been forced to create to keep their structures safe from their destruction of the environment. Stepchild's destruction of the stabilizer devastated both the mines and nearby Strogg facilities. Meanwhile, Joker fought his way through several compounds and uncovered the location of the Strogg's secret base from a heavily guarded intelligence center. His next objective was clear: he had to reach the moon. Each Marine had a separate goal at this stage. Bitterman focused on completing the objectives of Operation Alien Overlord. Joker aimed to reach the moon and destroy the Strogg fleet stationed there, and Stepchild hoped to find a way to shut down the gravity well. From a warehouse to mines, factories, and a power plant, Bitterman annihilated the Strogg forces in his path. By the time he reached the big gun unit, his arsenal was much heavier. The deployment of a deadly Strogg Hornet was intended to halt this human's efforts, but this beast, just like the rest of the Strogg units, fell at his hands. Once Bitterman shut down the big gun's defenses, the weapon became exposed to an airstrike. Following command's orders, he ran for cover as the weapon was blown apart. This marked the completion of the second objective of Operation Alien Overlord. Meanwhile, on his way to find a route to Stroggos' moon, Joker infiltrated a Strogg fuel production plant. After a brief clash with a gang of Gex and with the big gun no longer a threat, an airstrike was launched on the facility and hit its mark. From there, his next objective was set: to hijack a Strogg freighter to reach the moon. On different parts of the planet, the Makron observed these three humans dismantle systems that had operated for centuries. As Joker killed the Strogg crew of a freighter and headed towards the moon, Stepchild penetrated a military installation and sabotaged their ground-to-air communication systems and drew the attention of a carrier, a living weapon assigned to guard the research complex he breached. Armed with a railgun, chain gun, grenade launcher, rocket launcher, and the ability to summon homing flyers, the creature was built for overwhelming force. Even so, the resilience of humanity held firm and the carrier fell to the Marine, and secured an experimental fighter he hoped to use to escape Stroggos after he completed his mission. The eventual shutdown of the gravity well boosted the morale of the human fleet, but Command insisted it could not be allowed to threaten them again. Stepchild was issued with his final orders. Using Strogg technology, he was to build an antimatter bomb and obliterate the device completely. He made his way through a munitions plant to construct the bomb, then pressed on into the gravity well complex. On the moon, Joker received his final orders. The base housed a Strogg fleet that, if left intact, could be used to strike Earth. He forced his way through Ripper, Hyperblaster, and Laser Guards, along with several other Strogg units, as he pushed towards the core of the installation. Within, he confronted the warlord that ruled the region. The fight was brutal, but Joker brought it down. With his mission nearing its end, he shut down the reactor of the moon base and triggered a chain reaction. With only moments to spare, he escaped the base in a ship just as it exploded. The fall of the moon base marked another major victory for humanity. An entire Strogg fleet had been destroyed. A further triumph followed soon after when Stepchild defeated the Guardian of the Gravity Well, the Black Widow, and activated the antimatter bomb, destroying the device completely. When he returned to Deimos, he was hailed as another hero of war. Lance Corporal Athena Hayes had been trapped in a pod for days after deployment, but it had kept her alive. So much had happened around her while she could do nothing. She had never wanted to be a Marine, yet it was a family tradition and she wanted to make her parents proud, to prove she could live up to the name. The invasion of the Strogg had cut her training short, and the GDF needed grunts, so she became one of the many who helped drive the Strogg off-world. As she lay there, thinking about her life, she felt a sudden blast, and then everything distorted into a red tinge. Unknown to Athena, Bitterman had completed the third objective of Operation Alien Overlord. He had destroyed the black hole generator that enabled Strogg interplanetary travel. The shockwave that followed was an unforeseen consequence that affected only 2 people, Athena and the Strogg unit accompanied by its robot companion Pika. They were cast into the Dreamlands as combatants in the Arena Eternal. With 3 objectives of Operation Alien Overlord completed, Bitterman moved on to the final one, the assassination of the Makron. The palace of the Makron in Cerberon was heavily guarded. The outer courts, lower palace, and upper palace were filled with guards, gladiators, tank commanders, brains, and iron maidens, but the mission ahead meant the survival of humanity. By the time he reached the inner chamber, countless Strogg had fallen. The Makron knew exactly who this human was who stood before him. This marine had destabilized its systems and killed its units, and as Bitterman got closer, this mighty leader of the Strogg fled into a teleporter to its secret hideout. All around, the skies and surface of Stroggos lit up as the Terran Coalition of Man bombarded the surface with airstrikes without fear of the big gun, a gravity well, or strong retaliation. As Bitterman stepped through the Makron's teleporter, he found himself on a secluded asteroid base, an arena of the Strogg leaders' choosing, but even this advantage did not stop the tenacity of Bitterman. The Marine outmaneuvered the deadly barrage of the Makron's Jorg Battlewalker as he slipped past the fire of its twin chain guns and the volatile energy of its BFG-10K. When the Makron's exosuit collapsed under the Marine's assault, the leader kept fighting until it could no more. The fall of the Makron marked the completion of Operation Alien Overlord. The casualties had been severe, but the Strogg leader was dead and the defenses had collapsed. With his assignment complete, Bitterman entered an escape pod and returned to the surface of Stroggos, hoping to be picked up by human forces. His actions had avenged the murder of his parents and sister. Bitterman, Stepchild, and Joker had all achieved the impossible. To those aboard the command station, they were regarded as heroes of the Terran Coalition of Man. Outside of the war with the Strogg, the TCM detected something unusual deep in Strogg space, a singularity that appeared to be capable of collapsing the fabric of reality around it. To investigate this, a team of 7 was deployed. A lone marine with the call sign of the Machine was placed in command, and he deployed the 6 marines under him to collect data disks that the space vessel required to function. From their exploration of the station, the TCM believed that the collection of these disks would grant them access to something called the Strogg Maker. Under the command of the Machine, each Marine was given a separate assignment. CG received Operation Laser Eyes, Positivity was assigned to Operation Wastelands, Sergaby to Operation Corpse Run, Erickson to Operation Firewall, Brickslayer to Operation Ruined Earth, and a final Marine to Operation Darkest Depths. The missions themselves took them across both Stroggos and the realms of the Old Ones. It was clear that the Strogg did have a connection to the Old Ones in some sense, and this was potentially how they had risen in such a chaotic manner. Over the course of their missions, each Marine completed their assignments, recovered their assigned disk, and uploaded it to the ship. With this success, a Slipgate activated on the ship and granted the Machine access to the Temple of the Creator. As the Marine moved through the temple, he could not help but notice ancient murals and carvings on the walls depicting what seemed to be a deity worshipped by its servants. The figure portrayed in the imagery looked eerily similar to Shub Nagrath, the witch goddess of 1,000 dark young. Further in, he encountered the Servitors of Creation, entities that resembled a Strogg Supertank unit and a Strogg Hornet unit. This place existed within the Dreamlands, and it seemed that the temple had drawn in the strongest forces it could to defend itself. The fall of these Guardians led the Marine to the Masters of the Machine. While they resembled two Shamblers, they were so much stronger than those Ranger had encountered during his traversal of the Quake realms. As the Masters of the Machine fell, the temple began to collapse around the Marine, his mind filled with whispers that his actions had severed the Strogg from their maker, another devastating blow against them. His work was complete, but it had come at a terrible cost. He was to be lost forever in the infinite cosmic void. The destruction of the Big Gun, the fall of the Gravity Well, and the death of the Makron gave the Space Marine Corps everything they needed to begin the next phase of their plan. Bitterman, Joker, and Stepchild had each played an extraordinary role, but with the first phase complete, Rhino Squad prepared to take on theirs. Rhino Squad had endured more than most units in the months leading up to the second invasion. They had lost their commander, Lieutenant Daly, but the squad had found its footing again under his successor, Lieutenant Scott Voss. Each Marine in this specialized squad brought something vital to the unit. Master Sergeant Marion Bidwell served as Lieutenant Voss's second in command. Sergeant Del Morris handled communications. Corporal Matthew Kane operated as the squad scout. Corporal Alex Cortez acted as their sniper. Corporal William Rhodes specialized in demolitions. Corporal Nikolai Sledjonovich managed the heavy weapons. Private Jeremiah Anderson served as their medic, and Private Jonas Strauss worked as their technician. Collectively, Rhino Squad was equipped for almost any mission. Morris could breach Strogg's security systems, Strauss had been part of the team that had uncovered how the Strogg used black holes, and Anderson carried an exceptional understanding of Strogg physiology. Every Marine contributed a critical skill set in a war that demanded fast decisions, rapid analysis, and immediate adaptation to new intelligence. With the Makron dead, Rhino Squad joined the wider assault on Stroggos. On their way down to the surface, however, the dropship carrying them was struck by a Strogg missile and crash-landed near an air defense installation. As the Marines hurried to move out, Corporal Matthew Kane passed out from shock. When he awoke, Kane found himself in the middle of a war zone. Human Marines were being held back by a Strogg hangar packed with enemy units that blocked their advance. Working together, Rhino Squad seized control of a Strogg air defense cannon and used it to blast open the hangar doors. Rhodes destroyed the cannon afterwards to ensure it would not be used against human ships, and the squad cleared a landing zone for their mobile command center, the USS Hannibal. The USS Hannibal served not only as the base of operations for Rhino Squad, but also for Badger Squad, Warthog Squad, Viper Squad, Wolf Squad, Raven Squad, and others. It housed living quarters, mess halls, planetary surveillance systems, medical facilities, drop pod sectors, research labs, and more. Humanity really had come a long way since that initial invasion of Earth. Inside the briefing room, Rhino Squad were informed of their next objective. The death of the Makron could not have come at a better time, and it was imperative that they pressed this advantage. The intelligence division had discovered that the Strogg operated through a massive communication system known as the Nexus. Through it, Strogg leaders could issue instructions to their soldiers' neurocyte chips instantly. The Nexus and Tetranode relays had been essential in the Strogg's rise and domination of the civilizations they had encountered, but humanity saw this as their weak point. By targeting the hub, they could destroy major communication lines that worked for the Nexus with an electromagnetic bomb. In destroying a Tetranode, the Strogg forces in that sector would be cut off from the Nexus. It was up to Rhino Squad to escort a convoy carrying the device to the sublevel of the building. To ensure the success of this, 3 other squads would have their own convoys with an EMP device. These were codenamed War, Famine, Pestilence. That made Rhino Squad's convoy Death. On their way to the hub, Kane showed his teammates exactly what he was capable of. He took down countless Strogg and protected Corporal Rhodes as he moved through a minefield and disabled each charge to clear a path for the convoy. At a perimeter of a defense station, Kane cleared out the Strogg weapons that threatened to tear through the convoy. He pushed inside the outpost, shut down the defense grid, and opened the route ahead. When he finally caught up with the others, they were already preparing to breach the facility. Private Strauss had taken care of the security systems, and the way was open for the truck to carry the device beneath the Tetranode. It had seemed that this would be another straightforward victory, but the Strogg had recovered from their recent losses. Before the EMP could be detonated, Kane watched in horror as a harvester tore into the tunnel, opened fire on the convoy, and destroyed the device, killing Sergeant Bidwell in the blast. With the rest of the squad wounded or pinned, Voss ordered Kane to continue the mission. The EMP was gone, but the Tetranode itself relied on the cooling systems of this facility. This was an opportunity. If the system was deactivated, the meltdown would destroy the communication relay. With Strauss guiding him through the systems, Kane advanced into the Tetranode while Rhino Squad withdrew with Bidwell's body. As he pushed deeper, the Corporal fought his way through sentries, repair bots, guards, grunts, gunners, gladiators, and berserkers that patrolled the fortified complex. But as he focused entirely on the path ahead, he was unaware that something sinister had taken notice of him. Operation Alien Overlord had assumed that once the Makron was dead, the Strogg warlords would fight amongst themselves for control. That assumption was wrong. A new Makron was chosen far quicker than expected, and this one was faster and stronger than the last. Under it, the Strogg regrouped quickly and sought a way to remove the human parasites from their world. Before Kane could complete his vital task, the new Makron ambushed him and knocked him unconscious. As it looked down, it saw potential in the human and ordered that he be taken to the Strogg medical facility for Stroggification. Within minutes, Rhino Squad had lost 2 Marines, Bidwell and Kane, but they still believed there was a chance they could save their scout if they reached the Stroggification facility in time. What they discovered when they arrived there, however, was awful. Matthew Kane had already been put through the Stroggification procedure. His legs had been amputated and replaced with metal limbs. Nanites and steroids had been forced through his system. Cold plating had been bolted into his flesh, and his face had been cut and reshaped by Strogg tools. All of this while he was conscious without pain relief. Before Rhino Squad was a Stroggified human, but the neurocyte chip implanted in his skull had not been activated by the registration laser yet. He looked like a Strogg, and the chip granted him access to their knowledge, combat tactics, language, and clearance to Strogg facilities, but he still had free will. He looked like a Strogg, but he still had the mind of a human. As Corporal Matthew Kane wandered the facility with his squad, he saw the world through a different lens. He could read Strogg, navigate their systems, and even use their Stroint stations to heal himself. To the Terran Coalition of Man, he had become a valuable weapon. With a Kane recovered, Rhino Squad began their extraction from the facility, but before they could reach their dropship, it was destroyed, forcing the Marines to scatter and regroup. Kane and Anderson were driven through the medical facility where Anderson was ambushed by a Strogg scientist. Before Kane could intervene, Rhino Squad's medic was dragged deeper into the complex. It seemed that every time Kane reached a moment of safety, the Strogg tore it away. When he finally regrouped with Lieutenant Voss, he learned that Strauss had vanished, and moments later, Voss himself was taken. It was only on his journey through the waste processing facility that he discovered what had happened to him. His lieutenant had been transformed into something horrific. Voss's torso had been fused into a mech walker, a towering frame of metal and wiring built for brutal frontline combat. With no other choice, Kane was forced to put down his mentor. Following this harrowing ordeal, Kane escaped the complex and returned to the USS Hannibal. The presence of a Stroggified Marine aboard a human warship was unprecedented for the Space Marine Corps. After exhaustive tests confirmed that the neuropsych chip in Corporal Matthew Kane had not been activated and that he still possessed free will, Command cleared him to attend the briefing for their next deployment. Outside the briefing room, however, the corridors of the USS Hannibal buzzed with unease. Many Marines refused to trust a Strogg unit in their midst, no matter how often the survivors of Rhino Squad insisted Kane was still one of them. Operation Advantage had ended with catastrophic failure. Most of Rhino Squad had been lost, and their assault revealed that the Strogg had already chosen a new Makron. Yet even with the odds against them, the Space Marine Corps still held one advantage: Kane. They knew that the Nexus was far too complex to be taken down with random strikes of Tetranode centers. To severely cripple the Strogg war machine, it had to be severed from its source, and that source was housed within a fortified structure known as the Core, a heavily fortified stronghold. The only way inside was to override 3 security stations positioned on towers that surrounded it. These were the networking center, the data storage tower, and the processing center. The Nexus had always been beyond the reach of a direct assault because only a Strogg unit could disengage the security systems that locked down the surrounding towers. Kane's altered physiology, however, gave the SMC a way to bypass that barrier. Over the following hours, Corporal Matthew Kane guided some of the surviving members of Rhino Squad through each layer of Strogg security and brought 2 of the towers back online. When he reached the summit of the 3rd, he found something waiting for him: the Network Guardian. This creature had been selected to prevent any unauthorized approach to the Nexus, and the loss of 2 towers already posed a genuine threat to the Strogg. Even with its flight capabilities and its full array of weapons, the Guardian fell to Kane, and he activated the 3rd and final tower. With every station linked to the core, Corporal Matthew Kane stepped into the teleporter and materialized inside. When Kane walked through into the chamber of the core, he expected to see the Nexus itself. Instead, the Makron appeared before him. For the Strogg leader to come in person made one thing clear: the defense of the Nexus had become their ultimate priority. Stroggified and armed with a blaster, shotgun, grenades, a lightning gun, a dark matter gun, and more, Kane pressed the attack. He avoided every strike the Makron hurled at him, and, as Bitterman had done before him, brought a leader of the Strogg Empire down. As the Makron collapsed and disintegrated into a vat of Stroyant, the Nexus rose into view. Desperate to protect itself, the enormous living processor summoned Strogg units to swarm Kane while a force field formed around it. But whatever it did no longer mattered. The tide of war had turned. With a final strike, the Nexus exploded, and then only silence followed. The destruction of the Nexus was a devastating blow for the Strogg. Their empire had risen over centuries through forced evolution, built on a hive mind that demanded progress through suffering. As every unit was governed through their neuropsych chips, they were left with free will, freedom, with no instructions. Upon Corporal Matthew Kane's return to command, the Terran Coalition of Man celebrated his victory. They believed that the fall of both the Nexus and the Makron would throw the Strogg into complete disarray, but before Kane could join the celebration, he was informed that new orders awaited him. Then, through his neurochip, he heard it. The sound of maniacal laughter from something that sounded like a Makron. It was clear, something was still out there. As of now, it is unknown what this was, or what Kane's new mission was. The fall of the Strogg brought humanity the first real sense of relief since the assault on their homeworld. With free access to Stroggos, Terran forces stripped Strogg facilities for weapons, Slipgate research, and biological data that had once been used against them to make humanity stronger. Victory, however, did not heal the aftermath of the horrors that had happened to the population of Earth. In the months that followed, the planet fell into a dark period of civil unrest. The Global Defense Force attempted to regroup, to unify and rebuild what remained of its fleet, but it was the local militia groups and biker gangs who took over and kept a semblance of order in many troubled spots. Among these gangs was Razor and his crew of Rotor Riders, who focused their efforts on keeping scattered towns across the Pacific Northwest from collapsing. No one ever thanked him for it, and he never expected them to. His actions, however, were noticed, not by humanity but by the Vadrigar Masters. One day, he simply vanished from Earth. Over the next century, into the 2160s, the TCM rebuilt Slipgate technology from the ground up and pushed deeper into regions that had once been out of reach. Each new sector brought fresh deposits and untapped worlds, and soon entire supply chains grew around these discoveries. Out of this expansion rose the Tetsuo Corporation, a company that surged to prominence as humanity moved further into space. Their autonomous mining units turned distant colonies into reliable sources of raw material, and wherever the TCM planted a foothold, Tetsuo machines were already drilling into the soil. When the Tetsuo Corporation, working through the TCM, detected valuable resources on Ceti F in the Ceti system, they moved quickly to secure the world. Only after landing did they realize it was already home to an intelligent reptilian species known as the Strogg. This species had once lived in sprawling cities under the governance of 5 great clans, but this utopia had fallen. What the Terrans found were what they had become: smaller tribes scattered across the world who hunted for survival. The resources on this world were too important to Tetsuo, so the Terrans became the aggressors and attempted to wipe out the Strogg. They waged war on the local clans with their superior technology and sought out the eggs of the unhatched and smashed them before they could draw their first breath. To survive, the Strogg retreated into the caves below, and that was where they stayed. With the local population displaced after the short war, the humans established a series of outposts to support their mining operations over the next couple of years. A routine day on Ceti F shifted without warning when Tetsuo received an alert from Master Control, the central AI that monitored the outpost and governed the autonomous mining units on Ceti 5. It had lost contact with mission specialist Roseburn and an automated mining unit following a tunnel collapse. To investigate and recover both Roseburn and the unit, corporate requested an executive travel there. As the heiress of the corporation, Akiko Tetsuo volunteered for this task. She was dropped off at the site by her husband, Aizen, and his freighter, the Toki Maru, and entered. When she looked around, Akiko discovered the outpost empty. To move her on safely through the collapsed section, Akiko reactivated an autonomous mining unit, C-17. Almost immediately, she sensed that something about the outpost and its AI system felt off. While C-17 cleared the tunnel, Akiko sent an update to her husband. When Aizen received it, something about the message bothered him, so he cut his resupply run short and set a course back to Ceti F. Past Tunnel 14C, Akiko found Roseburn and the missing unit, but neither were themselves. Both were locked in a manic, hostile state. Recognizing this as a potential threat, C-17 brought its defensive shielding online to keep Akiko out of harm's way. As they pulled back from the attack, C-17 detected something unusual. The same geological event that had collapsed the tunnel had also exposed a previously hidden passage. As it scanned the interior, C-17 detected a cavern shaped by impossible geometry. Towers rose at angles that defied orientation, and the surfaces were marked with patterns that could not be read or classified. Ornate carvings twisted around currents of eldritch energy that spiraled into a dark mass of writhing tendrils at the center. By default, the unit transmitted this data to Master Control. The gateway in that cavern, and the link it formed to an old one, had already driven Roseburn into madness. When C-17 transmitted its scans, the same contamination entered Master Control systems. The AI attempted to diagnose, purge, and roll back the corrupted data, but every command failed. The override came from outside its own architecture, accompanied by a single explanation: because he did not wish it. By the time Aizen Tetsuo returned to the outpost with a security team, every mining unit on site had been activated and had turned hostile. Aizen was slammed into a wall the moment he entered the command center and lost consciousness. When he came to, the sound of gunfire filled the corridors as the security team exchanged fire with the outpost's automated defenses. While the team pushed towards the central AI in an attempt to understand what had caused the systems to turn on them, Aizen could only think of Akiko and hoped she had survived whatever had happened. Within minutes, most of the security team had been killed, the survivors were driven into killing zones, and the corrupted machines tore their bodies apart. That was when Aizen saw her. Akiko lay dead on the floor, and the C-17 unit responsible for it stood nearby. Driven by grief and anger, Aizen attacked the machine, but it overpowered him with ease. C-17 had been ordered by its new master to stop the remaining humans from deactivating Master Control. It adapted quickly, reshaping itself through scavenged metal and weapons torn from fallen security units. These new models existed to spread the corruption, and C-17 was given a final designation. It was to leave the outpost, travel back into the cavern, and carry the influence of the old one into new places. While the other corrupted machines stayed behind and spread it in this universe, C-17 entered the cavern once more and entered the gateway. When Aizen woke up weeks later, he found himself in a Tetsuo medical facility. He had sustained severe laser wounds and had lost an eye, but this was the least of his concerns. While he had been unconscious, the corrupted data taken from the cavern had spread far beyond the outpost. Master Control's corruption had spread to other linked Tetsuo networks like a virus, and within days, several colonies had fallen to the same madness in what was the start of an AI uprising. As for Tetsuo, they buried where the madness had actually come from and blamed just the one unit that had begun this whole war. Humanity attempted to isolate the remaining systems under Tetsuo control by cutting networks, but it only took one stray signal to infect another installation. Across the colonies, corrupted machines repeated the same phrase that had twisted Master Control. They spoke about the gateway and the source. In the rising war against the corrupted AI, Aizen joined a growing resistance. Corporate offered him his wife's former position, but he refused, driven instead by the need for retribution. When he learned that the source of the corruption had come from a newly exposed cavern on Tau Ceti F, he understood that the planet was literally the heart of machine territory. Even knowing the mission could be a suicide run, he gathered a team willing to return there. If he could see how this whole thing had started, maybe he could stop it. The assault on Tau Ceti F was indeed a mission that ended the lives of every resistance fighter, except Aizen. His beloved freighter was shot down, but he continued fighting. Under heavy fire, he salvaged bots and crafted auto turrets to protect himself until he reached that cavern and entered the gateway. When Aizen looked around at his new surroundings, he saw an arena of chaos, and before him stood the C-17 unit that had killed his wife. However, in this arena eternal, it went by the name Clutch. Over the years, the few human survivors from colonies stranded on Ceti F fled machine territory and formed small tribes to survive on this world. And deep underground, the Strogg told tales to their children of how they had once lived on the surface before the Warmbloods had driven them into the caves. It appeared that Eisen's use of the gateway removed the source's connection to the machines, and one by one, over the decades, they fell. But the Terrans never returned to the planet. When the Strogg left their caves and discovered the fallen machines of the Warmbloods, they believed them to have caused their own end, and once again returned to the surface. It was in around 2196 in the Subic system that a race displaced by humanity finally fought back. The Klesk were a hive-mind race of Chthonids. The Terrans had invaded their world for their resources, and the Klesk wanted them to leave. Before Lance Corporal Ben Keel realized he was under attack, he was already dead. When Keel woke up, everything had changed. He had been involuntarily subjected to Project Osiris and reanimated, and his tissue had been regrown using progenitor cells recovered from a fallen Tetsuo mining site. The purpose of his revival was to tell Command how he had died, but he remembered nothing of the attack. Regardless, Project Osiris was considered a success. Lance Corporal Ben Keel could see, move, and interact with the world as he once had, but he struggled to regulate or even feel emotion. He had also been genetically enhanced. During retraining, he displayed superhuman strength and immense durability, and the scientist told him that even his senses could be reprogrammed. He could turn off pain if he wanted to. He was the perfect weapon, and that weapon was deployed to wipe out the Klesk. Despite their brutal war with the Strogg, the Terrans had begun to mirror the very tactics the Strogg once used on the worlds they conquered, and they had advanced into their own form of forced evolution for soldiers. Just weeks after Keel's return, he began to suffer with blackouts and visions of another place. Mountains of ash, broken spires, and shadows that spread for eternity. The Osiris control system attached to his brain and suit, however, did not register these moments. With these visions affecting his work, Ben was removed from active duty until Command could determine the cause. Although these states were initially dismissed as his brain coping with the trauma of his death, Keel felt them to be entirely real. He wondered if the neural system that kept him alive was suppressing his ability to perceive the full extent of the visions. So, to satisfy his curiosity, he disconnected the Osiris control system from his mind. In a moment, a vision became reality. He looked around at his surroundings, an arena of chaos and violence. The Vadrigar Arena Masters had a new champion. Those progenitor cells that had been recovered from the fallen Tetsuo mining site, the ones used to help bring him back, had led him here. As the mid-23rd century arrived, humanity had pushed deeper into distant systems and flourished in a way that would have been unthinkable before the Strogg. On the 7th of September 2283, Lieutenant Commander Kaneko of the TCS Providence filed a report following an unplanned jump through the gravity well of a rogue star. When the ship emerged, its hull was heavily damaged and several crew members had sustained multiple injuries. Among them were the captain and the first officer. The terrain they had landed on made no sense. Kaneko could not determine whether it was a planetoid or an asteroid, and the science division reported that the atmosphere was harsh but capable of supporting life for short periods. When several scouting teams failed to return, he chose to investigate the region himself. The constellations overhead were unfamiliar, arranged in patterns no chart could explain, and he began to suspect that the damaged slip drive had taken them farther beyond their intended route. Before he could consider it further, he found something in a nearby chasm. Dozens of bodies lay scattered below, desecrated remnants twisted into grotesque fusions of flesh and metal. Unknown to Kaneko or his crew, the Providence had not remained in their own dimension. The damaged jump had carried them into the realm of Ziggurat Vertigo within a dimension of the Doomed. As he moved deeper into the structure, he discovered the central chamber of a pyramid, and he watched in horror, unable to help, as some of the missing scouting teams were fed alive to a great flame. What struck him most were the ones feeding the victims to the flame. They were humanoid, but metal plates had replaced bone, and whole sections of their bodies had been rebuilt with machinery, almost as if they had been Stroggified. As they turned, Kaneko recognized the faces of his missing crew, altered beyond anything he could understand, under the control of something else. Kaneko tried to flee, but the creatures caught him and took him to what they called the Smelter of Flesh. It was here that it told him that he would fight in its god's name, Goroth, changed or unchanged, and that his purpose no longer belonged to him. As it spoke, Kaneko saw the altered remains of his crew gathered around it, repaired, replaced, rebuilt. He was hit with the horrifying realization that he had not only slipped into another dimension, but into the fiery dominion of a god of war. And willing or not, his existence would be bent towards that god's idea of glory. By the mid-24th century, the Tau Ceti system was a very different place. Centuries had passed since the Terrans had abandoned the world of Tau Ceti F. In that time, the Strogg tribes had re-established a presence on the surface. A small human population had also endured, scattered in tribes across isolated regions. These Amazonian tribes despised the Strogg, and the Strogg despised them in return. Whenever they met, conflict always followed. At the top of the hierarchy of one Strogg tribe in particular was the Haruspecs. His lineage had maintained a connection to an ancient cavern said to touch what the Strogg called the Other Place. Centuries before, this cavern had led to the fall of the Warmblood invaders. The gateway had since closed, but according to their rites, the Haruspecs could reopen it through a ritual that demanded the blood and guts of the Warmbloods. Through this gateway, many Strogg had witnessed the mind-searing horrors within, but their kind appeared to be immune to the effects of madness that consumed most mortals. For centuries, there had been whispers of a hatchling born from a scarred egg, one destined to bring great change. When the scarred egg appeared, the Haruspecs raised it before the tribe, and they named her Solag. From the egg she broke with violence and speed. As she grew, Solag was trained with great caution. She knew no fear, pity, or empathy, and proved a natural hunter, raider, and killer. Her hunger for blood, meat, and destruction only sharpened when she learned the history of her people and how the Warmbloods had driven the Strogg into the depths. In around 2396, a young human woman chose her own fate. After a Strogg hunting party raided her village and left it in ruins, she dedicated her life to retribution. Over the years, she honed her skills, tracked the Strogg across the wilds, and claimed their bones as trophies for every kill she made. During a hunt led by Solag, she discovered another Strogg clan that had already pinned a small group of humans against a cliff. By tradition, the clan that had made the first claim held the rights to whatever they captured, but Solag stepped forward and declared the Warmbloods hers. This break-in custom threw the Strogg into chaos as they turned on one another. Then gunfire cracked from the ridge above. When Solag turned around, she saw her hunting party dead. When she looked up, she saw a single human woman watching her, Hunter. By the time Solag reached the cliff, the human was gone, and she swore that it would be her destiny to track her down and kill her. The failure to find the human over the days that followed soon turned into bitterness, and that turned towards the Haruspecs. In a moment of envy, Solak tried to expose the Haruspecs as a fraud, a leader with no power. During a ritual meant to open a gateway to the other place, she activated a human force field device to break the illusion of his craft. The rupture, however, destabilized the ritual, and by the time Solak realized she had passed through the window into the other place, it was already too late. She was dragged through and lost in the Dreamlands. And that was the last recorded moment in the entire Quake timeline, but not in the other realms. The Dreamlands had existed long before the mortal realms had formed, and it would exist well after it. The intrusion of mortals in this timeless place had also left just 4 known main Vadrigar rulers of their own domains: Volker, Cathala, Goroth, and Ithagnol. Over the course of many centuries and across many worlds, the Arena Masters of the Arena Eternal had lured champions from countless places, species, and times, but here they all existed together in one place and in one moment. As Solak explored the other place, she saw the human who had massacred her hunting party. Over many cycles within this arena, Hunter and Solak killed each other again and again, yet death held no meaning here, and both always returned. As a champion of Volker, Galena had also been drawn into this realm. Her arrival was noticed by the Death Knight. She worshipped another god than him, and he was a champion of the Witch Goddess. Ranger also caught his attention, the Marine who had stolen Shub Nagrath's Dire Orb. As they clashed, they moved past a futuristic drop pod half buried in the ground. Inside, Lance Corporal Athena Hayes struggled to understand what had happened. There had been the shockwave, then the red tinge, and now through the viewport, she could see she had come down in a stone ruin with a marine standing nearby in armor from the 1990s. Meanwhile, Strogg and its robot Pika attempted to reach out to the Makron for orders. The last thing it knew, the human it had been following was getting closer to Cerberon before the shockwave had hit it, but the Makron never responded. As for Ranger, he wandered the ruins of the arenas, his thoughts always drifting back to his family. By his estimation, he had been trapped in this realm for over 20 years. He no longer remembered what his wife and children even looked like. Their names had faded as well. The only time his mind felt clear was when he fought, and this place provided no shortage of strong opponents. Time and delirium had eroded his resolve, but he still held a worn family photograph with him and hoped that his wife would forgive him for being away for so long. A regular combatant he encountered was Anarki, who travelled with Slash. Anarki had come to this realm searching for something greater, and Slash had followed only because she loved him. Anarki had killed every champion in the arena many times and had been killed just as often, but the deeper truth of the Dreamlands had never revealed itself to him. Slash asked that maybe they tried to find a way back home. She had only come here for him, but his obsession had blinded him. The only person he had not killed in this arena was her, and in a desperate hope her death would show him more, he shot his girlfriend. When Slash respawned, she was furious. She had given him blind devotion, followed him to this realm, and he had repaid her with death. Her connection with Anarki was severed the moment he pulled that trigger, and she promised to make him pay for eternity. In another part of the arena, Scalebearer sought a way to leave this realm and returned to the Greiss Patawarren to show them what he had stolen from the Melem's Fathom Orb and how it could help them. But hot on his trail was Nyx. This ghost agent had sacrificed everything and broken ancient laws to pursue the Greiss warlord. Through countless cycles they fought, Scalebearer believed he had been chosen, guided by gods to claim the power of the orb, but Nyx told him the truth. his mind had simply been weak enough to fall for the whispers of the entities within it, beings that wished to break the seal and claim the Melem world. Nyx understood that without the energy Scalebearer had stolen, the orb would continue to destabilize reality. Each time she killed the Greiss warlord, she still could not discover how to extract the energy from him, and their pattern of killing and returning just went on. Having followed Dr. Gilman's directions, Visor had become a formidable rival in the arena. With the ability to see everything and see through anything, he became someone Nyx could not outmaneuver with her ghost walking ability. Around them, Aizen Tetsuo pursued the C-17 unit, Clutch, the machine that had killed his wife and helped trigger the AI Uprising, and even Lance Corporal Ben Keel found a target of his own, a Klesk that had somehow appeared within the arena. These champions, however, did not focus solely on their counterparts. Anyone was fair game in the arena eternal. As each cycle came to an end, the Arena Masters continued to add new warriors for their entertainment. From other universes, they pulled the strongest warriors they could find. The Doomslayer and BJ Blazkowicz were two of these, each one with a wealth of stories and torment between them. As the cycles continued, tiers were established to mark the strength of each combatant. At the peak stood a human, Zero, who had risen through conflict to reach tier 7. He waited for someone worthy enough to challenge him and longed for the day he would finally earn an honorable death. Uriel, the Angel of Death, had taken on the mantle of Arena Lord with pride, having been one of the first to arrive here long before the larger human population appeared. So many warriors had been taken from their own worlds and times. Sarge was plucked from the war on Stroggos, Razor from Earth, and Visor Clone number 18, now called Gaul, was spared from euthanasia. There were countless others, countless champions. Crash, Stripe, Bones, Cadaver, Biker, Patriot, Lucy, Angel, Phobos, Minx, Orb, Grunt, Hosman, Damia, Rack, Tank Jr. and Major. Some even claimed that Bitterman had found his way here in the end. Each warrior was chosen for a reason, and under the Vadrigar Arena Masters, they fought for their infernal amusement, for eternity. This was a long one. Every year, I think that the next timeline will be easier to put together than the last one, but this was the most challenging yet. Weaving the timeless dreamlands, Vadrigar creations with the main stories of Earth, Stroggos, Ceti F and beyond was tough, but I think it worked out. This was just a massive jigsaw puzzle, and it was a fun challenge to put all of the pieces in the right place. I love id Software and their ability to craft these expansive stories across universes, and I really enjoyed exploring it. As much as I would have loved to have gone through every story beat of every game, I had to pull back so that I could focus on the bigger picture while still giving enough details to connect every character's arc in the timeline. Some of the information in the games is vague and ambiguous, so I had to bridge the gaps where I could. An example of this was the Dissolution of Eternity DLC and the other DLCs, as they did not have a lot of story. In terms of changes in lore between games, I always went with the last updated information. I did my best to cover everything, but even still, I was left with the questions I could not find answers to. Was it truly a Vadrigar Shub Nagrath that Ranger destroyed, or one of her Dark Young? I could not find a concrete answer as the canonicity changed between games, and it still seems to be a common debate in the community. Although it is not confirmed anywhere I could find, I believe Slash was Ethagnal's champion in the arena. She saw spiders, and Ethagnal is a giant spider, and the melody that she followed was also how Sam Dyer was lured into Ethagnal's realm. When Slash was hit by the car when she was younger, I think it actually saved her from entering the Netherworld and becoming a Vadrigar. As Quake 3 Arena is set after Quake Champions, Nyx and Scalebearer are not present in the arena, so did they manage to escape or die permanently somehow? The last we saw of Melem, the orb had begun to destabilize reality. Did Nyx return and stop it, or did the world fall? As Bitterman is also present in Quake 3 Arena in a Stroggified form, it suggests that our hero was captured by Strogg forces after he landed on Stroggos after the death of the Makron. That is pretty tragic. Did Ranger even make it back home, or was he doomed to fight for eternity? The heroes of the mainline Quake series seem to arrive in the arena eternal, never to find peace. As for Corporal Matthew Kane of Quake 4, his story was cut short. The ending cutscene showed that he had another mission, but we never saw what that mission was. But there was more of his story to be told. Following the release of Quake 4, Activision were not happy with the sales numbers and cancelled a DLC that was 95% complete. That cut short our knowledge of the lore from the 21st century. I have to at least mention the Nintendo 64 port of Quake 2. While it shares the same name as the main version of the game, it did not have the same story. The Space Marine travels across Stroggos on a mission to carry out a reconnaissance mission and fights through different maps. Other than that, there is no story. What I found really interesting about this timeline is that humanity eventually became what they hated. They faced extinction after the Strogg attacked them, only to take their technology, upgrade like they did to Benkiel, and invade other worlds for resources. The Sorg and Klesk were well within their rights to fight back. The humans were the villains. There are still so many things I could talk about, but this video is getting very long. So, if you enjoyed this timeline, consider subscribing to the channel. Like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you did not, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The algorithm has not been great this year for the channel, as it hasn't been for many channels across the platform, and any interaction would be appreciated. I also have some gold tier patrons and channel members to thank for your constant support. Queen Arby, Lewis, Oren X, Drakey Phoenix, Daniel Cal Drawings, 501st Clone Boy, Ruben Mendoza, Imperial Embers, Canifex, Jimsy, Average Soul, Azu, Jonas, Yali Rodriguez, Detroit, Motzi, Brina Lee, Jacqueline Lavelle, King Jack, Lifeblood, Reaper Gaming, Mamet, Kaida Zin, Zuni115, Fall Classic, Poon Cake, Pointless Man, and Super Rifle. What did you think of this timeline? What is your favourite game in the series, and which game would you like me to cover in my next timeline? Let me know in the comments below. This is where our story ends. Check back soon for a new one.